Welcome back. In this episode, we'll discuss the challenges for the Indo-Pacific in 2024, focusing on China, cybersecurity and political warfare. We'll uncover the strategic dynamics that are expected to dominate the region and influence global security. What cultural and strategic shifts are necessary to combat advanced threats in cybersecurity and political arenas? How can countries leverage AI and cybersecurity to turn the tide in their favour? And I guess that sort of folds into the next sort of topic around, well, you know, if we have certain governance and also, I guess, moral obligations, assuming that, you know, collectively, and I think we do in the Western world, we share similar moral obligations, but how do we then combat like the initiatives of the folk to the north, where assuming, you know, they don't have the same obligations, be it human rights, be it moral, be it whatever. I mean, how do you combat that?
Conflict is inherently dirty. But we, as Western nations, have historically put rules around the way in which we conduct ourselves in conflict. Some of those are guided by actual national policy settings and so forth, and all treaties or alliances that we have with other nations, and just our general character and behaviours. But at the end of the day, it's an inherently dirty business, and it's the business of exploiting opportunity. But you've got to put, and we have historically put sort of ring fences around you, as you described, in terms of kind of the rules of the road. But there's opportunity to exploit, I think. The question is, where's the threshold of exploitation, I guess? How do you describe it? Where you want to remain legitimised, I guess, in your behaviours. I mean, that's inherently what you always want to do. You always want to be seen as the legitimate stakeholder if there's conflict. And that brings with it some burden in that sense about the type of way you'll engage, the rules of the road and so forth. But it's not easy, but as I said, it's inherently dirty.
Yeah, I think we've always suffered from the disconnect between our own sort of values and our principles and those of we just came out of a long war on terror where I'm not saying that it's over, but where our adversary was utterly unscrupulous, right? Had no issues whatsoever. You know, we're watching things play out in the Middle East now with, you know, using civilians as human shields and using, you know, all kinds of different terror tactics. And how do you combat that? And we have to sort of figure out how far down which road are we willing to go? And you saw the United States, of course, struggle with that in the beginning of that war, because we had these questions of the enhanced interrogation techniques and all of these things, you know, because you're dealing with this other kind of adversary. And now is no different, except for the adversaries that we're sort of looking at mostly right now are state adversaries, and they have more resources, and they also shape their national policies to sort of blur the lines that we like to make nice and shiny. Take, for example, you know, China with its civil-military fusion. We like civilian and military things to stay far away from each other because we don't want somebody else targeting our civilians. We don't want somebody saying, well, there could be a tunnel under that hospital, and so they blow up the hospital. But that's exactly what we're looking at right now in the Gaza Strip. And so, you know, when we look at China and its military fusion and the fact that it has fishing boats, quote, you know, operating in doing security operations in the South China Sea, that blurs those lines and makes for all kinds of difficult potential decisions in a conflict situation. So yes, as we go into this brave new world of next generation or future technologies, you know, we are going to try to be very scrupulous and make sure that certain things don't happen, and our adversaries may look at those as being opportunities to get a leg up on us.
Ray, you've been doing a lot of work up in the South China Sea for the last couple of years, and obviously expert commentary on CNN and other channels as such. But what have you seen lately up there? Obviously, you spoke about the fishing boat militia and whatnot. But from a technology point of view, I mean, we hear down here, not that it's AI, but we hear down here that that the Chinese have been using sonar on Australian divers and so on and so on. I'm sure that a lot doesn't get reported, but what's the feeling like up in the Philippines and in the Vietnamese the East Sea and Vietnam, as they call it, and so on and so forth? What's the feeling like up there? Are they scrambling to try and get the best technology to try and help them, or what's the feeling?
Well, of course, China's neighbors are all playing catch up to where China is, and China has been running very, very, very hard to have force overmatch almost everywhere it looks within the South China Sea. And in doing so, it employs, as I said, the full range, and it is not afraid to go from a fishing ship to a bigger fishing ship, to a Coast Guard ship, to a Navy ship, almost without blinking an eye. And so, and what those the civilian vessels offer is they offer a pretext to escalate. So if you fire on a fishing ship because it's doing something that a security vessel would do, you've just given China a pretext to escalate, and China believes that escalation is in its favor because it can escalate more quickly and with more boldness or audacity than its adversary. So, that civil military fusion that this is I'm trying to bring us back to this discussion of next generation technologies, is a nicety that we have in the West for very good reason. We're based in the Geneva Conventions and other things that China is essentially looking at as a breach to be exploited so that it can take maximum opportunity where it can find it.
Yeah, right. I think that's a super good point, right? One is that our adversary doesn't have the same line of scruples that we have. And I think to take it a step further, we also have to make sure that our allies have the right set of scruples, right? Because if you're fighting somebody with no scruples, it's likely going to get dirty, right? And you've got to have the wherewithal and the moxie to be able to fight. I'm not saying necessarily on their level, but you have to make sure your allies are willing to go as far as you are, right? And in this environment, a lot of our allies, and you're hearing it with, Israel and Palestine and the folks that are out there, saying there should be a ceasefire, or they are not necessarily willing to push it as far to get an adversary to stop doing what they're doing, right? Which makes it easier for China to escalate into a victory, right?
But you hear this terminology all the time now. It's how we can combat first mover legitimacy first mover advantage with second mover legitimacy. Which talks to the point that we were circling around earlier about sort of maintaining the sort of good guy status in this whole piece in all our actions, and you hear that more and more. That. Ensuring that our posture and our approaches collectively and otherwise can always be seen to be legitimate, in themselves, and that's central to the way we are collectively approaching things in the region, on the basis that the adversary that we're preparing ourselves for or dealing with is likely to have that first mover advantage. And operating in an environment where rules are treated differently by the respective stakeholders. So I think we'll continue to be true to ourselves, but the question is what risk that presents in our ability to prosecute objectives and so forth, and maintain legitimate face, is always going to be central and becoming increasingly so.
What sort of technological espionage do you think we're seeing in the region, and how does that, getting back to that point as well, I mean, how does that, what advantage does that provide to our adversaries versus, the way that we operate?
Well, so again, when you deal with adversaries who are, less concerned about the rules propagated across the international space, then they do have certain advantages. So, for example, the China Coast Guard, which operates essentially as a paramilitary force in maritime East Asia, can be selective in when it decides it wants to broadcast its position on the internet, the what they call the automatic information system, which tells everybody, here I am, right? So it's basically a beacon that says where this ship is at any given time. See, Matt, I can talk Navy. I know how to. I'm all about the nautical. So the China Coast Guard is able to sort of get away with turning off or turning on or switching it from Class A to Class B, so that it can be more or less visible as it wishes. Whereas if we were to do that, if our Coast Guard was to do that, then we would rightly be looked at as violators of international norms and international rules, and held up to the standard that the American people expect us to follow.
And we're in an era where kinetic warfare or kinetic actions are usually quite easy to, well, not quite easy, but quite easy to interpret whether or not that is an act of war or an act of aggression. In the cyberspace, that's not so. We're being attacked daily around the world, and yet we are playing this sort of red line game with them, where we can't determine where they've crossed the line. And so I think we need to sort of engage more active cyber defense as a way to be more, defense focused than war focused. Just to try and level the playing field. And if you can knock out intel of another adversary or a nation-state actor, that may actually be safer for everyone, but more effective than actual kinetic engagement.
Yeah, that talks to my earlier point, Pete. As I said, I think we're already in conflict in two domains, space and cyber, and have been for some time. But the threat environment's different. To me, the threat environment that we face collectively now is orientated around the concepts of time and range. Things are now at range, distance-wise, and we have no time. So strategic warning times have sort of been collapsed, I guess, for want of a better term. We used to rest on our laurels in the West, that we had plenty of time to address things, shortfalls, risks that had been illuminated through any number of opportunities in exercises or otherwise, or even other conflicts. But we no longer have that anymore. And I think it talks to posture, how we are collectively posturing ourselves to deal with that environment where there literally is no warning time anymore. And we're effectively living in an environment, some would suggest, where we've already ceded the initiative. So plans tend to be orientated these days around those things which have a central theme about regaining time and initiative. And if it's not, then why are you planning that?
And that's kind of my point a little bit. I agree with you, Paddy, is instead of trying to find the next technology that will chase a hypersonic weapon, let's try and use potentially AI to collaborate all of the data that proves to us the intent of having to fire that thing. So let's try and get ahead of the firing button instead of trying to chase a hypersonic, which we'll probably also need to do as well.
Patty, I think I'd add one more domain that we don't talk about much in the military because we don't consider it a military domain, but it's very much in play right now. And I would say that's the information warfare, or the cognitive domain, in which our adversaries are very much engaged and very focused on winning that political warfare. Actually, while I was in Australia, I heard General Campbell, do a very good speech on this once, and I was grateful that he brought it to the fore. What is an effective tool in the toolkit for an open society to engage in political warfare, right? Because in our societies, political warfare means this party against that party, competing for domestic advantage. It's the liberals versus labor, it's the Republicans versus the Democrats. But in an authoritarian state, it's us against them. It's them against the United States or its allies, and they are very much engaged. And I think one of the things, and I'll climb up on my hobby horse here. Hang on, let me get on my hobby horse. So I'm gonna get on my hobby horse and ride around the room a couple times. What the Philippines has been doing in with its maritime security problem with China has been kind of revolutionary in that they decided to fight the cognitive war by taking pictures. And they would just, when the Coast Guard ships went out, they might have a few embedded reporters on board. They would certainly have cameras. And when those ships came back, all of the vivid images of the water cannons and the ramming and the blocking and the swarming and all of that stuff would go straight out to the local and international news. And I'm not sure that all of the rest of us have studied that counter to China's gray zone warfare as a tool in our information warfare toolkit yet, and realized, hey, they may be onto something here. Maybe we need to look into this. And what we've been calling it with Sea Light is we've been calling it assertive transparency. So let's not just put out the pictures when we find them. Let's go find the pictures and put them out.
And then also probably comes down to an unattributed communication program as well that could be undertaken. I mean, and getting back to your point too, Ray, around those mediums. I mean, TikTok. I mean, is that not a state-owned platform that is used to? I know my boys who are well, my oldest boy who's 10 wants a TikTok account. You're not getting one, Dad. Can I download TikTok on your phone? No, you can't. But it's how kids are communicating even here, and if they don't have it at school, they're left out. It's like, how do we compete against that?
The way I describe it is we're all in competition, right? All nations, and in the region there are some pretty big stakeholders that we're talking about here. But the reality is there's a competition going on that requires a fight in order to win it. So I describe it to some people as there's a fight to be won. And it's much more complex, I think, than most people would give credit to. So what Ray is talking about, which I 100% agree with, is the information warfare piece within competition at the moment, which is being prosecuted far more successfully by one major sort of protagonist, I guess, than others. But the Philippine example is a really good example of how that can be combated effectively, and the messages and the learnings that we can take from that in order to better posture ourselves, I guess, to win the competition. And the reality is, because none of us want to lose the competition, because if we transition past that to crisis and conflict, nobody wants to go there, because of the capabilities that exist in all our respective arsenals, for want of a better term, just brings a whole world of grief to all of us. So nobody wants to cross that line, I would contend. But that competition is fierce. It's far more complex than I think it's ever been, and it's being exploited far more successfully by a couple of key stakeholders. And the trick for us is to learn from it rapidly and start to take advantage of it ourselves.
It sort of leads into the next point we were going to talk about is around how cyber attacks and vulnerability of our critical infrastructure, but mediums or things that our adversaries are using at the moment. Like you said, we've been at war for a couple of years already in the cyberspace, and we've seen here in Australia at least. And I'd love to get Matt and Ray's input on what's been happening in the US, but. Cyber attacks in our healthcare system out here, with Medicare, on our telco, with Optus, Australia's second largest telco that holds government contracts as well, secures information, Department of Main Roads and Transport, access to everyone's driver's licence details and everything that goes along with that. I mean, how do we ensure, I guess, when we're talking about the networking piece as well, how do we ensure that not just across the Five Eyes, but even just between or within the Five Eyes, but other allies in the region, how do we share information to ensure that everyone is cybersecurity ready? Because these things are going to keep evolving. The way they do it, the technology they use is going to keep evolving. How do we ensure that the unified approach gives us an advantage, or protects us at least in those critical industries?
Well, yeah, recently we've had some issues here in the States with, I think AT&T lost service the other day, and I don't think they've come out and said it was a cyber attack, but I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. We also lost, some internet providers lost the ability to put out internet across Texas not long ago, and again, nobody came out and said it was a cyber attack, but it wouldn't surprise me. And the amount of folks that were outraged because they couldn't use their cell phone or couldn't use their internet accounts for whatever they're using it for was pretty remarkable, right? And you can see how much disruption can be caused by just screwing with it a little bit, right? Just little tweaks, and there are industries that are constantly under attack, and I'm not sure we've figured out how to pass those best practices on, because every country's got a different look at how they're going to either defensive or offensive cyber, right? And right now I feel like we're kind of stuck on our heels in defense.
But what it's doing, Matt, is it's through technology. It's the ability to directly undermine public confidence in a country, in its government's ability to provide, function effectively, to provide a safe, secure environment for the population. And that's really what we're talking about here. It's a targetable vulnerability in any nation, and you've got the means now through various technologies and capabilities where you can attack networks and such things in a country's public transport, telecommunications networks and otherwise, which basically bring into question by a population its trust in the government's ability to maintain normal operations, safe, secure environments. So you're targeting national will in a conflict sense, and there's much greater capacity now to be able to do that directly, and that in itself is prosecuted increasingly more effectively. And the question is, are we moving fast enough to understand that and work out ways within which to deal and combat that threat?
I guess the takeaway from all of this is, what's in it for people who might be, listening and watching, whether it's an enthusiast or a professional in critical industries. So, what are the key takeaways, guys, for the last couple of minutes to wrap it up?
Audit your own house. Before you go sort of shopping for the newest and the latest and the whatever and you're going to be swamped with information, perhaps you should review your own house, see how secure it is. When you give the number of small to medium businesses here in Australia, it's upwards of 80%. That's 80% of our economy is small to medium business. And I would argue that most of them are not cyber ready. And so I think maybe just an audit in-house, get some data and learn how to improve your business from both a resiliency point of view and then what you can then do to contribute to the economy and, grow your own business.
Do you know anyone who can analyse that data, mate? Like insights,
I've got a couple of phone calls I can give you. Phone numbers.
Right. Okay, lovely. Thank you. Ray, to wrap up from you, mate.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that's come up over and over again is, and Patty has brought this up from the beginning, is that, the battle is on now. We can't sit back and think that this is just some future thing that we have to worry about, because that's not the way our adversaries are thinking. They are, we make this very clean distinction between peacetime and wartime, and that's not how they work. And so we have to be, getting up every morning thinking, in Indo-PACOM, the term is we have to be ready to fight tonight. Well, we have to be ready to fight now, because the battle is on now. And in some of these domains, there is no later.
And Matt, we've obviously been working for the last little while now and across the region with commercial and government organisations to try and help them seize that advantage and gain that competitive edge over their competitors. Mate, how do you see this, mate?
Well, I wish I had more kids, right? Because I would really like to start training them to do some of this data mining and cyber attacking, and because it's like you were talking about, the lines aren't blurred in places like China. Everybody is doing the business of the Communist Party, right? Every company, every person could be co-opted, and we don't have that kind of system or network here. And my 4 kids aren't gonna do very much. So we got to kind of figure out how we're gonna fight that.
Great. And Paddy, finally over to you, mate. What do you think people who are listening and watching this could get out of today's little chinwag?
Yeah, look, I just want to sort of reinforce fires on Ray's point, which is our collective point, I guess. We've got to fight smarter than we are at the moment. We still see the environment the way we used to see it. It's a different sort of proposition now. I think the consensus is there that we're already in a competition or a fight of some description at the moment, which is being better exploited by our adversaries than we, but the technologies are there. But it's going to take some fundamental cultural shift in thinking. But I think the opportunities lie in the AI and the cyber domains, particularly, or for AI and certainly the cyber domain, where there's opportunity for industry to engage into the government sectors, defence sectors and so forth, because that's where the opportunities lie. It's being able to posture yourself better to win this competition, as we would describe it, I guess, because no one wants to take that next step to exploit national objectives respectively. So if you can understand that and appreciate that that's the environment that we are faced with now, and if you agree with that sort of concept of time and range, I guess that in itself steers you in a sort of direction as to where I guess opportunities may lie, in these areas that we've been discussing today.
Right. Thank you. Well, Matt and Ray from the US, thanks so much for your time. We look forward to catching up with you again next time. Pete down in New South Wales, Pete McChrystal, the General as we call him, General McChrystal, and Paddy Hallinan. Paddy's going to leave us with a Derek and Clive joke because I think we've got an R+ rating on this R18.
I was going to throw up another nomination for November if you were interested, guys over there. That was all. Well, it's just in case one of them falls asleep at the wrong time.
Crikeys.
Or whatever. Or if the other one's in court.
Oh, jeez. Crazy. Well, guys, thank you and really appreciate it, and we look forward to catching up again next time. We've covered a lot of ground today discussing the upcoming challenges in the Indo-Pacific region for 2024. Thank you for tuning in and taking part in this important conversation. Are there specific areas within national security you'd like us to tackle in future episodes? Do you have any questions or thoughts about today's discussion on China, cybersecurity or political warfare? We'd love to hear from you. Make sure you subscribe to our podcast on your favourite platform to not miss any of our in-depth analysis and discussions. Your subscriptions and feedback not only support our show, but also help us shape the content that matters most to you. Share your thoughts, hit subscribe, and join us as we continue to uncover the complexities of national security within our region.